I was talking about the Lord and this or that, but yeah, should probably talk about work more than we do, but just to see part of the privilege of having and working with staff like that is to see the growth in people. That's really a big chunk of what drives me, motivates me, or gives me great joy to see. When Andrew's been there for over 10 years, just to see the Lord working in his life, it's just, is that better? Yeah, it's a real pleasure, it's a real joy. And I just want to bless you, Andrew, for all you do, and the great, always a word of encouragement coming from him. If you ever need some encouragement, go talk to Andrew. He'll pump you up. And yeah, it's exactly that word that was for me today. The light at the end of the tunnel. Thinking negative all week. I feel like the most unqualified guy to talk about what I'm going to talk about today, because that was a real battle this week to not go there. Wasn't very successful. Yeah, so this plane went down in a very remote part of the world. And there's only one survivor. It was a Mennonite man. And came to be that he was not getting found anytime soon. So he went on about his life, and he built himself, being the good Mennonite that he is. He came, built himself a community there to live and work and survive. And it was a long time later that plane was flying overhead and saw this activity, human activity down here. And so they came to check it out. And of course, the Mennonite guy was very proud to show him around. And says, "What's that?" "Oh, that's my house. Nice little modest one-bedroom house." "And what about that over there?" "Well, that's the store. Needed supplies and stuff, so I built the store." And walked a little further and said, "What's that building there?" "Oh, I'm a man of faith, so I built a church so I could attend church twice a week." And then we looked across the road, and there was, "What's that building there? It looks like it hasn't been used in a while." "Oh," he said, "that's a church I used to go to." Go for it, Glenn. You can do it. There we go. And today's title I'm calling it "Don't Be Deceived." It's a result of a 3-year journey that I've had just to things that I've learned and studied, and I feel that it's not talked about very often in church circles, especially, and so it's not a hurrah kind of a thing, but it's more of a challenging kind of a message. Because we're really living in a day and age where there's an all-out assault being unleashed on this earth like never before, and the final frontier of the battle is for our hearts and for our minds and our soul. The continuous onslaught of this persuasive messaging pounding our souls from morning to night is something this world has never seen the likes of before, at least not in such a wide scale. The enemy has taken over nearly every influence of authority, from Hollywood, education, government, world leaders, media, and sadly many churches. And now he's coming for you. So what we need to start with is the real you. And why is it that Satan hates you, us, so much that he's constantly looking for someone to devour? So here comes the blackboard. Just to kind of, so the real you. I think Psalm 139 talks about how we were formed, created in our mother's womb. He knew us long before we were ever born. And so, what part of us did he know? Like, we have a special DNA that is like no one else on this earth, right? We have our personality. We have gifts. We have our passions. Even abilities, talents, all these things. So all this together makes up what we read in Genesis 1 is we are made in the image of God. All these things together. Let's not forget something very important. Our emotions. Our mind. And our will. Come back to that later, but I just want to, all those things together really make up the real you. So, number one, we have to learn who we are. How do banks train people to recognize a counterfeit? They spend a lot of time studying the real bills, and the more familiar they become with the real deal, the easier it is to recognize the counterfeit, right? So the more we become familiar with and learn who we are, the easier it's going to be to detect the counterfeit. Years ago, I worked for a seed farmer, and he planted like certified Foundation crops that were used to generate more seed. So they had to be very particular for weeds and other, especially volunteer crops in there, so that it wouldn't contaminate the seed stock. So we had to go what they call roguing, if anybody knows what that is, where you walk the fields and you pick out voluntary grains within a grain field. So there was a 100-acre field of bearded wheat. So that's wheat that has all the beards on it, and we were supposed to pick out barley, which is also bearded. So to find barley plants in a bearded wheat field and do that 100 acres of it. And my boss, he'd been doing that for years, and we walked a certain feet apart and we walked along the fields. And you're scouting for, and he would, Rob, stop, right in front of you. And he'd come over and pull it out, like. But by the end of summer, I could find barley in bearded wheat. Because he told me to focus on the wheat, not the barley. So once you focus on the barley, you can train your eyes to see the little difference or to focus on the wheat, or you could see the barley. He was nuts. He could drive along the road, and all of a sudden slam his brakes, run into the field, and pull out the barley. It was something, but that's an example of If you know the real, you can easily identify the counterfeit. So, Psalms 139, you were made all the delicate inner parts of my body. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as long as I was formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the womb, dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Us as church folk, I think we're kind of weak when it comes to knowing how to love and value ourselves. We've been taught from Sunday school on not to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to live a life of sacrifice, turn the other cheek. And over time, we can develop a kind of a doormat Christianity belief system. Well, these things are true and good, but in the right context. If you ever, my personal favorite is if you've ever been to Christian marriage counseling or heard the sermon on marriage, they will all teach you about the family priority list. You know, if you put God first, your wife second, the kids next, and then job, career, ministry. Where are you? You don't even make the list. Jesus taught us that to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind, so he's on top, you got that right. And then to love your neighbor as yourself. So it's God, others, us, me, you. We can't give what we don't have. We can't love beyond what we love ourselves. Someone that doesn't believe that they are worthy of love, someone that doesn't value themselves, this is someone that is unable to receive love from others and God. If you're not able to receive love, you're also not able to truly give it. If you don't have Father's love to give, then what will often happen is it's a disguised love, or it ends up being more of a toxic love than anything. So we need to learn to value ourselves. So God knew us before we were born. His thoughts towards us are immeasurable. All the promises and blessings He gives us, I mean, we know it is right. Let's not forget that He also, when He died on the cross for us, paid the ultimate price. Like, that is the ultimate measure of value right there, that He would do that for us. He did that to redeem us, to cleanse us, to heal us, free us from all shame, guilt, and condemnation. If that's how much He values us, how dare we? How dare we think any less of ourselves? How dare we let others belittle us? How dare we let others shame us? And how dare we let others guilt trip us? I would venture to say many of our trials and struggles we face in life are a direct result of not having a healthy love for ourselves. See, when it comes to possessions, most of us are pretty good at protecting those. We store it, lock it up, we put a fence around it. If some stranger were to jump the fence into your backyard, how would you react? The first reaction would be, oh, this guy, what's he doing here? He's got no business being here. Go check it out. kick him off, or whatever. But you're instantly on guard. You're protecting your property. Why do we not have that same protective instinct when it comes to our most valuable asset, which is our core being, our identity, our heart, our emotions, our mind, our will? Why don't we put a fence around that and protect that? Like a gate. Proverbs 4:23 says we should guard our heart above all else. So that just sounds pretty important. Why do we do that? Because our heart determines the course of our life. So what we believe in our heart is going to affect our decisions. What decisions we make affects our life. And what we believe in our heart has all come through here to get to here. So our boundaries, what we let into our heart, is going to affect what we believe, is going to affect what we decide, and is going to affect the course of our life. That's what I see Proverbs 4:23 saying. So often we like to blame the devil for the trials of our life, but most of the time it's a direct decision that we have made. The fence is called having boundaries. Emotional boundaries, mental boundaries, relationship boundaries. The height of the fence is a direct reflection of the value you have placed on yourself. People without boundaries often become people pleasers and enablers. And show a big amen to myself on that one. It's really a huge subject. If you want to learn more about it, study more, look up more about it, Dr. Henry Cloud, he's written a book on boundaries, teaches and has a lot of authors, many books on it. YouTube or wherever else. It's really good stuff. So that's learning to value yourself, and we have to learn how to love ourselves. I'm not talking about like social media, selfie kind of love here either. You know, like a Photoshop best version of yourself. Taking the time to hear God and what He's saying about us. We read in Psalm 139, His thoughts towards us are more than the sand on the shore. Like, that's a lot. So He's constantly thinking of us, talking to us. Discovering what your gifts are, what your passions are, and take time to develop your interests. Who do you think gave you those passions for gardening, for music, for welding? Well, that's not very spiritual. Well, the first mention in the Bible about someone being spirit-filled was a craftsman to build the temple. Just a little side note there. So it is. Is that God made you that way. It is who you are. It is important. Find out what fills your cup. And don't let your cup run empty. Because again, you can't give what you don't have. Jesus himself recognized when he needed to recharge. And he just pieced out in the middle of ministry time, thousands of people around him. He needed to recharge. The next is to get to know your enemy. So first is learning to love yourself, value yourself, and discovering who you are. That's really the foundation to recognizing the barley in the wheat field. Next, we need to get to know our enemy, learn how to recognize him. Again, it's a topic that is talked about very little, and I think God's people suffer as a lack of knowledge. And my theme verse today is 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Got the Amplified version here. Be well balanced means temperate and sober of mind. For the enemy of yours, the devil, roams around like a roaring lion in fierce hunger, seeking someone to seize upon and devour. So be well balanced, temperate, sober of mind. Also reminds me of First Peter, somewhere, God's not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. You can have all the firepower in the world, but if you don't recognize or see your enemy or know where he is, it does you no good. You can be flying around with an F-35 Raptor fighter jet with all the sophisticated weapons, but if you can't find bin Laden, you can't take him out. We hear a ton of messages on the power of the Holy Spirit, and we have all that power. That same power that raised Christ from the dead, that lives in you. We've been given all authority under heaven and earth. We are seated with Christ in the heavenlies. How is it then that us, oh, that sounds church folk. How is it then that us church folk struggle so much to live in that victory? You know, we should be praying more, give more, confess more, read your Bible more. Oh, my favorite. You must have sin in your life, brother. That's why you're not living in victory. That's why you don't have it. Yuck. Could it be that part of what hinders us from effectively using that power to defeat the enemy, first and foremost, is that we don't recognize the enemy when he comes around? Back to 1 Peter 5:8. The devil's always deceptive and shows up looking like the real deal. Stay alert. The great enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Why? A lion? And we know that he always shows up as a counterfeit. So it has to be a real. Revelation 5, verse 5, one of the 24 elders says, "Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Heir to David's throne, he has won the victory. He is one worthy to open the scroll and the 7 seals." So I found it interesting that the Lion of Judah is the real deal. The roaring lion, looking for someone to devour, that's the counterfeit. But how do we tell them apart? They look the same. The devil always imitates. One wants to devour you in every part of your being, the other one wants to seat you at the right hand of his throne. How do we tell them apart? You know, it would be so much easier if you showed up in his goat's head and horns and pitchfork. We'd all be able to recognize him and deal with him pretty quick. You know, what image comes to your mind when you hear the word witchcraft? It'd be so much easier to recognize him if he showed up like the pictures we all have in our head. The witch doctor from Africa, the smoke and the bad teeth and you know, if he showed up like that, we'd all know what to do. But no, he comes much more subtly than that. So witchcraft, it's a really broad subject, and it take a lot of series of messages to unpack that all. But like we talked about it a little bit today, There's one aspect of it that I believe is the biblical definition of witchcraft, and that is any effort to intimidate, to manipulate, or to dominate someone in order to control them, is what I believe the Bible refers to as witchcraft. And we are all vulnerable. I believe the Bible is consistent in the message that God has given us all a free will. And He will never override that free will. It sets us apart from all other creatures. Is God sovereign? Yes, He is. Is He in control of everything that happens to us? I don't think so. It's often it's used as a way of escaping our personal responsibility in the situation. Oh, God's in control. Whatever happens, happens. And we kind of give that as an excuse. Yes, He is sovereign, but we have the free will to choose on this life, and God does not override that. And therefore, we have all this evil, and things happen in the world because man is choosing that. You know, we can go out and buy that $90,000 pickup truck you can't afford, and then a couple months later, in church, and the pastor's calling, who needs a financial miracle? Yeah, amen. Now, it's an extreme example, but it happens. People have the right to choose their own path, even if it is a path of evil, of death and destruction. So, the first thing we have to realize is that just because we're talking devils, not the Bible verse, being a child of God, doesn't mean you have an automatic shield around you that the devil can't come and attack. What does that look like in everyday life? We have to be aware that the enemy is alive and well, and that he has the ability to influence people to do his work of killing, stealing, and destroying as many Jews as possible. Just like God has chosen to work through people to advance His kingdom, and He's an imitator. He also works through people to advance His kingdom. No one is immune. Matthew 6 is the chapter of the Lord's Prayer in it. And the last verse, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So it's a prayer that Jesus taught us to pray daily. And He's asking us to pray that we be delivered from the evil one. He comes as an angel of light. That was written in the context of false teachers, lording their position of power over them to manipulate and control. So today's church leaders, that would be today's context of what that would be as angels of light. Sheep in wolf's clothing, another name for it. So how can we tell if we're talking to a sheep in wolf's clothing? How about your best friend? Give an example. Jesus was letting His disciples know what was going to happen to Him when He went to Jerusalem. And what did Peter do? He took Him aside and said, probably the same thing that any of us would say to Him today. No, we're not going to let that happen to you. What did Jesus do? He turned to Peter and says, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap, seeing things merely from a human point of view and not God's." Notice the language. Dangerous trap, seeing things from a human perspective. So here's his own best friend. Got snuck in there, tried to sneak in there. But Jesus had good boundaries. He recognized the devil immediately and dealt with him. Get away from me, Satan. His word instructs us to be not to be ignorant of his devices. Well, if you don't want to be ignorant, it means you've got to do some homework. You've got to educate yourself. It doesn't happen on its own. You have to study to show yourself approved. Witchcraft. Intentional intent to intimidate, manipulate, or dominate in order to control someone. One of the consequences of repeated intimidation, manipulation, is that it becomes highly abusive. There are many types of abuse that can really, and you may as well pick a flavor. Regular salted, nacho, dill. Shameless plug there. Most of us are aware and familiar with something like physical abuse. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. We all get that, understand it. Sexual abuse, bullying, abuse of power. These and others would fall under the category of what's called overt or outward types of abuse. We can see them, understand them, and our culture has taken great strides to mitigate and to deal with those kinds of abuse. Then there's another whole area called hidden abuse. And these are where the really demonic tactics of the intimidation, manipulation, and domination are not so obvious to everyone, including the victim themselves. It's like the frog in the boiling pot of water situation. We can all recognize when someone has cuts, bruises, broken bones. When you show up with a heart that is bleeding and bruised, you can easily hide that. It's far more isolating because that someone in that situation has a very hard time explaining to anyone else what they're going through. And many others have a hard time understanding because there's nothing physical to see. Abuse always leads to trauma. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about trauma and the two different kinds of trauma that there are. The first one is what is called simple trauma. It's not really simple, but this is the term that's given to it. So a simple trauma is like a one-time event in your life. You have like a car accident, you have a death in the family, you have some tragedy happen, harsh word from a grandparent or parent and your kid, publicly humiliated in school, a one-time event situation. And these can be devastating, life-altering, kind of defining moment that affects the course of your life. It can be a short period of time or even lifelong, depending on how people respond to it. So these events are overt, meaning they're out in the open. They're easier to understand to some degree, even by those who have not experienced that same trauma. But most of us who are alive and well here today have experienced tragedy in our life of some sort or other, and can offer some sympathy and understanding to those who are going through a traumatic event in their life. The second kind of trauma is what is called complex trauma. It's a different type of trauma. It's where the same traumatic event happens over and over. It's like that death that keeps occurring over and over again. This type of trauma is covert, hidden. It's very deceptive and usually, and it's often perpetrated intentionally by others with the motivation to intimidate, manipulate, or numb. The victim is also unaware that there is even something traumatic happening to them. They feel that something is off, but can never put a finger on it. It's like the red flag is there, but you don't know how to identify it, you don't know what to do with it. It's referred to as a death by 1,000 cuts. So when a victim walks around with a bleeding, bruised, and cut up heart, loaded with pain of shame, guilt, and fear, but nobody knows that they feel like. Nobody knows and understands what they feel like. Churches and most councils aren't equipped to deal with this kind of thing, or don't understand it. And will often give ineffective, inappropriate, or even sometimes very bad counsel to the person seeking this kind of help. This type of abuse can lead to a myriad of problems in our life if not dealt with. The reality is that kind of pain, that kind of trauma reaches the same pain center in our body, in our mind, as sticking a knife into your leg. It's the same, has the same effect. And most of us have heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Complex trauma often leads to CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It's an accumulative thing. So one little thing at a time gets added, and it's not one thing that goes away. It's one, and another one, and another one, and another one. So just want to review some different types of abuse that occur. Abuse is what causes the traumas. So, you're familiar with physical abuse, verbal abuse. Far more deadly than a yelling, cursing tirade from a stranger is a constant berating, constant belittling, constant criticism or reprimands. Remember Peter and Jesus? The New Living Translated uses the word Peter reprimanded Jesus. You put a quick stop to that. Name calling, using sarcasm to cut down, threatening, humiliating, excessive blaming, exaggerating your faults. These can often come from a loved one. And we have nonverbal. I have a joke for you, Ronnie. We got it. What do you call this? Clip-clop, 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 clip-clop. Clip-clop, clip-clop, clip-clop. Any ideas?
This is an old lake.
What?
Horse.
A horse, yeah. It's an Amish drive-by shunning. Some of you will get it. So that's a form of nonverbal abuse. Shunning, glaring, unrealistic expectations. Example where you're expected to denounce, push down all your needs, feelings for attention, support, and always be 100% available for the other person. includes unpredictable responses like a drastic mood swings. So like when you come home, you never know what you're going to be opening the door to. It's like passive aggressive bullshit, so when I come. Then we get into psychological or mental abuse. One of the tactics of psychological mental abuse is a term called gaslighting. Anybody familiar with the term? Gaslighting comes from an old movie where the man was, they saw the gas lights on the wall, and his wife was trying to read in the room, and he would go mess with the lights. And then she'd get dark in here. Can you turn the light up? And did you turn the light? No, it wasn't me. And he'd go mess with it again. And that's gaslighting. It happened last Sunday here, didn't it? Curly. After church, he was sitting back there. I still had the iPad for the soundboard. And he was messing around. We sat there for a bit and waited for a bit. I was like, turn the music really loud while he was sitting behind the board. Everybody turned to look at him. And what did you say to me earlier this morning? Well,
I thought it was a little crazy. I was really confused.
you thought he was going crazy. So that's the whole intent of gaslighting, is to make the other person feel like they're going crazy.
He's a good guy.
He's a good guy. Yeah. Crazy making, another term for it. My definition is a lying or omitting certain truths, or otherwise creating a false perception in someone else, and it's for the purpose of distorting the sense of reality in the other person. So his sense of reality was also gone, because he was just using the board a few minutes ago. Everything was good. His reality was intact. And also it wasn't. Sorry. I did confess to it, but he banned me from ever using an iPad. Left my iPad at home today. Did you know that the first recorded sin in the Bible is a result of gaslighting? Genesis 3. The serpent came talking to Eve. Hey, what's going on here? Yeah, just living life. Nice trees you got there. Yeah, got some we could have. Eat from any of the tree we want, except that one in the middle. Did God really say that? Eve's sense of reality was God said. Eat from anything you want except that one tree. So along comes the serpent and starts to create and distort her sense of reality. And would lead to the first sin. It's a tactic used by every cultivator, everybody that's looking for control. It's if you can distort somebody's sense of reality, you can very easily control them. I mean, look at Eve. Adam and Eve, they had perfect communion with the Father. There was no sin up to that point. They walked with Him, talked with Him. I mean, if anybody should have been able to recognize the enemy, it should have been Eve. Another tactic is projection, or tag you're it. Denying your own unpleasant behaviors, or even thoughts and feelings, and then attributing them, often in an accusing way, onto somebody else. It's also a way to protect your reputation by redirecting your negative attention onto somebody else. If you repeat the lie often enough, people will believe you. The second recorded sin, the serpent made me do it. That woman you gave me made me do it. Another tactic is to create constant drama and chaos, no-win situations. Another tactic is isolation. What's the cruelest punishment we give to our worst criminals in our society? Or Arthur Pelosi?
Solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement. It's very common for abusers in a marriage situation to move away so their victim moves away from their familiar family, friends, and social setting. So it's a lot easier to control somebody. Not allow the person to go out to work outside the home, not to socialize, be very controlled socializing, or refuse or make it very difficult for the victim to visit friends and family. Or daughters that won't allow their mother to see her grandkids. As punishment. What a horrible pain. Probably worse than death. Because it's a death that keeps reliving itself without any closure. You find yourself constantly having to make excuses, covering up for... Do you find yourself constantly having to make excuses and covering up for a loved one? You've grown so weary of doing that you'd rather stay home than have to explain again why someone didn't show up to their family gathering or wherever. Triangulation. It's bringing that third person to form that relationship triangle, and the abuser can use that person as clout. Even so-and-so thinks that about you. Even so-and-so agrees with me on that. Or the third person will even back and repeat the narrative of the abuser. Those are some of the tactics that there's a whole lot more, but just give you a little just a few of them. How much time have we got? What's that? It's been like emotional abuse. And it's not just women, it's also men. Again, any behavior designed to control another person through intimidation, manipulation, we're going to get, if you know those three words, this is designed to create negative, toxic emotions of fear, obligation, guilt, and shame. These are what I call the 4 pillars of emotional bondage. It was a couple of years ago that I woke up in the middle of the night really big chains in each corner, holding up me on the stretcher there. Kind of felt like the paralytic that was being let down into the room. And while I was there, Jesus came with a great big pair of bolt cutters and cut the one corner of fear, went to the next corner, cut the chain of guilt, next corner, cut the chain of shame. And the chain of obligation. And like the paralytic man, I jumped up, leaping and jumping and praising God the rest of the night. Deliverance can come in an instant, but renewing the mind, that takes a little more time. But there's definitely a marked time in our family's life that night. I believe that generational curses were also, we drew a line in the sand and said no more. Another form of emotional abuse is a refusal to never be pleased, or refusal to ever be pleased. Nothing you do is ever good enough for the other person. It creates a massive distortion in one's self-esteem and self-worth. Another one is withholding affection. There's a doozy. If you ever want to cause someone a world of pain, and mess them up big time, just hold back your affection, attention. You guys close your ears. Or if you're in a romantic relationship, withhold sex for the purpose of manipulating and controlling your partner. You may as well roll out the red carpet and invite the devil for Sunday dinner. He's going to be there. Most victims will tell you that they would rather have physical abuse happen to them than emotional abuse. The body heals much faster and is often less damaging than emotional abuse is. Society understands physical abuse and has laws provided to protect potential victims. Emotional abuse victims are hurting just as bad, but there's nowhere for them to turn and are often dismissed when seeking help. The result is a brainwashing that happens by a constant erosion, a piece-by-piece dismantling of the victim's self-worth, self-confidence. Just one thing at a time. Today it's this. Tomorrow it's that. Next day. There's nothing left. The enemy won't stop. He wants to devour. Devour means truly eat. Not just take a nibble. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. There's also financial abuse, where you're limiting or removing resources with the intent to control or cause harm. Sexual abuse, we talked a little bit about it. And there's the whole area of spiritual abuse. Using God's name in vain. God told me to tell you. Why didn't you tell me? Using Scripture as clout back up your verbal abuse or to garner extra oomph behind your intimidation. Spiritual abuse has got to be some of the deepest wounding abuse there is. If you go to any Bible Belt region, you will find a whole plethora of disenfranchised former churchgoers, most of which are probably still believers, but not engaging in any church type experience. They're often left hurt, angry, and resentful towards anything to do with God or His people. Joined an online support group for this kind of thing some years ago. And the first, there's several thousand people in this group. One of the first things that struck me was that most of these people were talking like believers. Praying for you, that kind of, using that kind of language. And at first I made a post about it, just asking how many people consider themselves believers. Or were church going, that kind of thing. And it was shocking. There was a good 90% of them that had church affiliation or considered themselves believers that were part of this group. And the other shocking thing is how many pastors' wives were in this group. They've got to be some of the loneliest people. You know, again, from when the devil would show up with horns and pitchfork, you could recognize him. But he comes as wolf in sheep's clothing, roaming around the earth looking for somebody to kill, steal, and destroy. What I've been describing to you today in street language is hidden abuse, or a hidden abusive person. In psychology world, they would call it a covert narcissist. And the Bible actually talks a lot about the subject, actually. It's the spiritual force influencing people in this manner is the spirit of Jezebel. Jezebel is not the pastor's wife. Jezebel is a spirit that is rooted deeply in pride. God talks about insolent pride, the haughty, the liars. We talk about liar. Every word in the Bible, copy inspired, unjust scales, all those things. We're more likely to spot the signs of a victim than you will the abuser. Signs like the empty shell, fake smile, someone that is very empathetic, someone that is very people-pleasing and has no self-esteem and very next to no boundaries for themselves. The abuser will always hunt down that type of person because they're very easily controlled. So that's why it's a challenge to get to know, value yourself, love yourself. That's your best defense against succumbing to an abusive person. Young people, talk to you for a little bit. Especially you guys that aren't married yet. Just tune me in for a little bit. Yeah, party spot. Give you some of the signs to look out for when you're dating or thinking about dating someone. One of the signs to look out for is that everyone around them has to tolerate them. It's verbalized this way: oh, that's just Johnny. That's just the way he is. And everybody around is expected to put up with and tolerate their behavior. Why is it that everyone is expected to tolerate their behavior? Excessive, what is called love bombing. You're getting tons of flowers and tons of this, and you're getting gifts after gift. Use this. Check 1, 2, check. There, that's better. Love bombing. You're getting just over the top attention, gifts. I just want to take a little step back. Because that's how you get sucked in. Always rationalizing, never taking responsibility for their actions. Spiritualizing things: God told me this, God told me that. Many abusers they also suffer from addictions, whether it's pornography or alcohol, drugs, addicted to drama, addicted to spending, gaming, social media. And if you go back to every addiction, it can be traced back to a trauma in their life. And that's why it's so hard to get over some of those addictions, because we don't know how to go back to that original trauma and heal from that trauma that led us to those addictions in the first place. So we can modify our behavior for a period of time, but if that trauma is never dealt with, we're always going to end up going back to that. If you think you're in a relationship with an abuser, you want to definitely think about some of these things before you put the ring on the finger. Take your time. Abusers often hurry to get married. Won't listen or respect your opinions. Let's just get married. That'll fix everything. You find it difficult to speak up for what you need, what you want. So here's a little test. Try saying no the next time he really wants to do something, or she wants to do something. And then just look back and observe what their response is like. Do lots of observing of behavior. That's a big key. Consistent behavior over a period of time, 6 months or more. Anyone can put on a show for a little while, but will crack over time. That's why they're in a hurry to get married. Everyone has bad days. Everyone has bad behaviors. I'm not talking about, that's why I'm saying time, consistent behavior over time. When people show you who they are, let's believe them the first time. Watch how they treat or talk about other people. The waitress, the cashier, the customer service person, the person who cuts them off in traffic. How do they treat how does the guy treat his mom? How does the girl treat her dad? It's just a matter of time until you're going to be treated the same way. Are you being treated with dignity, respect, and kindness? Because your boyfriend, girlfriend is in the prime of their life. It ain't gonna get better. Can I get an amen? Because there's always red flags. Back to that group I was talking about, their story, that's all this, they're all the same story. They knew, they saw the red flags, but they didn't pay attention to them. But in the end, that still small voice, that Holy Spirit telling you, it's not okay. If you're feeling like something's not okay, it's probably because it's not okay. Pay attention to it. Eyes wide open before marriage, closed after. People will show us over and over again exactly who they are. We will look away 100 times or so because it's easier. It's easier to look at someone and see what we want to see instead of what's really there. But one day we will realize that life is too short to keep looking that way. Take a long look and see what they showed you the first time. That's who they are. Believe it. A couple weeks back-ish, so got it? You can zone out again. A couple weeks back, I talked about, shared a little bit about Elijah. You're all familiar with the story of Elijah. He called down fire from heaven, burned up the altar, killed 450 prophets of Baal, 450 prophets of Jezebel, outran the chariots. Like the greatest miracle in the Bible. And he gets one email from Jezebel and goes and hides in the hills. And he's suicidal. He's thinking, why me? I'm the only prophet left. On and on, we can read the story. First Kings, I think it's 22. Well, that was me this week too. I got an email from Jezebel, and I wanted nothing more than to go hide in the caves. So just as a clarification, disclaimer kind of thing, if you might be thinking, well, I do some of these things. Does that make me an abuser? And I'd say if you're asking yourself that question, probably not. Abusers do not self-reflect. They're not capable of it because the pride is too great. We are all sinners and fall short. And we want to control others. It's part of the curse in Genesis 3. What I'm specifically referring to today is when someone displays a consistent pattern of hidden abuse over and over for a long period of time. And there's somebody getting systematically devoured. Statistically, it's about 5% of if you have 5% of the population. My own thought is that in the church or a highly religious environment, it's probably a lot greater. So the last point, I'll let you go. Do not take for granted. Do not take the enemy for granted. Be vigilant and cautious at all times. Like I said earlier about Matthew 3, pray every day. Deliver us from the evil one. Satan can deceive Eve, Elijah, David, Samson, Moses, Peter, a third of the angels, wants to come and he wants to distort our reality. He wants to say to us, did God really say that? What God has spoken into your life, what you know and believe about Him, the real you, that's the gold, that's the treasure. You're made in His image, in His likeness. He died for you, paid the ultimate price. That's what the devil wants to ruin. So we need to really pray for discernment, learn to recognize red flags, put on the whole armor of God. Grace and Orlando, you want to come sing and do some music for us? I've asked them if they want to do that song, Open the Eyes of My Heart, Lord. I just want to read what I just took a copy to, well, actually it's a post from that support group that I was talking about. One woman's cry, and it really sums up, I thought, what they're feeling. And I'm sitting here crying, trying to figure out how I got here. I mean nothing to him. He's so mean, ignorant, arrogant. He thinks he has power when he shouts at me. I don't matter. His words cut. They hurt. Why do I love someone that treats me so badly? Why is he so mean and ignorant? Trying to figure out how to heal. Trying to figure out how to move forward. But how do I? I feel so broken, so beat up. Like I poured out so much into a bottomless pit. Yeah, to all those out there like that, you're not alone. Find support. Do all the research you can to empower yourself. Get to know yourself. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you. And lead me along the path of everlasting life. If there's ever a time we need more discernment in our life, it's now. And I just wanted to open up the time now while you guys are playing and singing, and just, if you want prayer for discernment, support, whatever, just come, we have some time, spend some time ministering to each other. Last Sunday we spent the whole Sunday doing that. It was awesome. It was amazing. And if anybody wants to do that, just come. People that feel led to come and pray, just open it up to, just come on down. very special guest tonight.